You can see the momentum there now is to try and do this. It's no longer a niche sport that goes on in quiet corridors somewhere. This is stuff that everybody is involved in.
They're the words of a Major General in the British Army. What he's referring to, though, isn't a new military tactic or piece of high-tech kit. Instead, it's climate change and the Army's drive to decarbonise.
I think there's nothing that the military does which is at odds with the green agenda. You know, we are inherently at one with the environment anyway. You know, it's part of what we do. We live, train, operate in this sort of environment. So there's nothing there. We face the same challenges that the rest of the nation changes, that we have developed capabilities which have over a generation or more than one generation become emitters of carbon. So we're grappling with exactly the same challenges as the rest of the country. But it's actually in our interest to do it. Firstly, you tend to find where carbon is released, it's an indicator of inefficiency. So actually by doing this we can be more efficient.
Like the other services, the Army's trying to reduce its emissions to make its kit and equipment greener. Where it differs is the huge amount of land that it uses, its garrisons, training areas and ranges. Across the UK, the MOD holds around 230,000 hectares of land. That's just over twice the size of Greater London and around 2% of the entire UK landmass. Globally, taking in Britain's overseas bases, that figure rises to nearly 800,000 hectares, 5 times the size of the capital and a quarter the size of Belgium. One of the largest areas is Salisbury Plain, which is where we met the General, currently head of plans and strategy for DIO, the body that manages the MOD's land.
Firstly, let's look at how we train. So we do a certain amount of our training live, but we are doing an increased amount in the synthetic environment. So taking some of the training out of the physical and doing it with modern technology, you can do a lot more of your training in virtual environments. So there's an element there, and actually that, in some cases, provides better training anyway. So there's part of it shifting it off the physical. But then you look at this sort of environment, and this rolling chalk grassland has been protected by the fact that it is military training. You know, the only reason this grassland continues to exist untouched, and one of the few remaining areas in the country that's like this, is because it's used exclusively for military training. It's not developed. So whilst you would think tanks driving around on this actually damage it, they overall protect it, and so we provide the biodiversity. But how will we actually grapple with making it net zero as we train? Well, that's quite difficult. Some of our platforms, tanks for example, how we get those, each individual one, to not release carbon is going to be difficult.
Hard it may be, but the Army's already made a start. At Millbrook Proving Ground in Bedfordshire, they've been testing hybrid versions of the Jackal and Foxhound combat vehicles. Their gearbox and fuel tanks removed and replaced with electric generators.
I'll just take my foot off the throttle and it'll just hold it basically where it should be.
These hybrid drives are already in use in electric refuse lorries. The manufacturers have simply adapted it to fit these military vehicles. In fact, they have so much torque that the engineers have had to turn the power down.
I can drive it without turning the engine on for probably 2 hours. But I can also, don't forget, I've still got an engine, so I can go just as far as the original engine can go.
General Richard Nugee wrote the MOD's strategy on climate change. He's cautious about how far the Army can go with electric vehicles, but he does believe they can have a real tactical benefit too.
Anybody who says they can produce a tank at 70 tonnes and generate an electric engine to be able to do what it can do today is talking rubbish. You can't generate a tank with the same properties as today's tanks using electric drives. What you are looking at is, let's take the hybrid Jackal. If you're electric, you're not producing heat, that can be seen by sensors. You're not producing gas, that can be seen by sensors. And you're not producing noise, and that can be seen by sensors, enemy sensors. So actually, by having a hybrid vehicle or by having an electric vehicle, you can steal around the battlefield without being seen, heard, or your emissions being seen.
The other area the Army's focusing on is its built estate. Westdown Camp on Salisbury Plain was the first to receive this new energy-efficient transit accommodation. part of a £45 million project to replace these old blocks with zero carbon buildings. Their modular design means they can be built quickly and relatively cheaply, their electricity coming from solar panels, which also power heat pumps that regulate the temperature. The General took us for a tour. These are being used now already?
So they're being used already. And one of the great things about the company that we've used to develop these is that we've got a contract which each phase gets better and better and better.
Right.
So they're learning things. So the next generation from the second generation from first generation reduced the amount of embedded carbon by a third. They looked at every single material, including the walls, including the floors, including the concrete pad, including everything, and looked at how they could reduce the embedded carbon. What they ended up with is a cheaper building, so then just put more solar panels up. They were able to use that money to enhance the building even further, put more monitors in. Next stage potentially is to look at how they can recycle the water. So the showers are recycled much more efficiently. So looking at every aspect of what this building uses, it uses electricity, it uses water, it uses heat. How can you make sure that the heat remains constant? How can you minimize the amount of electricity needed in order to heat by recycling the heat? All of that is beginning to be looked at. Looking at the windows, and if we go into a room, you can see it's a lovely cool room, but they're looking at the windows. Can you put monitors in the windows? They've already got some monitors to work out whether the rooms are being used or not, but they can put monitors in the windows which mean that you can actually take some energy from the windows themselves.
To try and meet its energy needs, the Army's also building dozens of solar farms. The first one opened at the Defence School of Transport at Leconfield. Built in just 9 weeks, the site's 4,000 solar panels should cut the base's carbon emissions by around 700 tonnes a year.
This is the first of 80 solar farms the Army intends to build at camps up and down the country by the end of the decade. 70% of the energy this one produces is used here at Leconfield, saving £250,000 a year off the electricity bill.
There's different graphs on here. This is the amount of energy we're producing today, which is 1,200 kilowatts of power going onto this site. And that is what the site is using.
So the whole of the base effectively being powered by these today?
On a sunny day, these will run the whole of the base.
This is amazing.
Well, the Army estate is responsible for 2/3 of the Army's carbon emissions, and therefore tackling those carbon emissions is critical to our wider net zero agenda. The Army is responsible for looking after the defence training estate, and we want to turn that from a carbon emitter into a carbon sequester. A great opportunity to exploit that 2% of the UK landmass that we look after for the nation that delivers support to our military training.
This is no longer a Cinderella issue, this is an urgent thing the Army needs to address.
It's absolutely a non-discretionary issue. It's not just an energy supply problem, nor is it just an environmental issue. It's a wider national stability and international stability, and arguably environmental issues will be part of the framing of global security threats of the future.
To offset its carbon, the Army is also planting 2 million trees at 25 sites around the country. In total, it'll cover an area about the size of 1,000 football pitches. Beckingham Training Area in Lincolnshire covers 650 hectares, 30 of which is woodland. As part of this planting scheme, Steve Holdsworth and his team have added another 11 hectares of new trees.
You can hear the range going on in the background.
Yep.
You've got to balance this land use with the military being able to use it.
Yeah, the woodlands provide cover, that's important, but obviously in terms of range safety there needs to be some degree of open space around the ranges to ensure that everybody's safe whilst there's some live firing going on. One of the things which I'm quite interested in is trying to get some more diversity into existing woodlands and plant plenty of different species within these new ones as well. That's going to be helpful for the future training. It's also great for climate resilience for us too, because we know that the climate's going to be different in future to what we see today. So we've looked at some newly established woodland, the new planting area within the shelters there, and here is kind of the next steps really. This plantation would have been planted around about 1980, so it's kind of around sort of 30, 40 years old. It's a bit late, but it's time to carry out some more management now and remove a proportion of the trees through thinning, and that will allow us to create some light right down to the forest floor and establish some new trees. It's going to be really important for us thinking about climate change adaptation to get some new species.
The MOD is also looking at restoring areas of peatland on its training areas to capture carbon, and they're exploring geothermal energy, the superheated water that lies deep beneath our feet, all part of a drive to make better use of the Army's vast estate and use new green tech to combat climate change. Simon Newton, Forces News, Lincolnshire. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel.